Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 22nd November 2023, where we'll be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now, looking at the table of contents, the very first article is regarding one nation, one election. This is because the former president of India commented on various aspects of the one nation, one election. Then we will be talking about child adoption in India following a very important Supreme Court observation. Next, we will be trying to understand the recent report regarding the emissions gap report of 2023. Next, we will be trying to understand the various aspects of National Immunization Program following a decision by the WHO to announce COVID vaccines under this. Finally, we will be also concluding the session with Tantalum, which is a rare metal discovered by IIT Roper scientists near the Satluj River. Now, the very first article is regarding the one nation, one election issue, because right now the former president Ramnath Kovind, who is heading the committee to review the application or say the practicability of this one nation, one election, he is telling that it is a very practical agenda right now and it can be implemented, and that any national interest must be considered in this particular case. And here we have to understand that this is very important for GS2, where we have the salient features of the Representation of the People's Act. Now we have to understand the background of this context is that India is right now taking very big steps and very big reforms, say it economically or politically, right? And that is why one of the biggest reform that India is pondering right now is to convert from a phase when the national elections and the state elections are held at different times to a stage when both the national and the state elections will be held simultaneously, which is known or popularly called as one nation, one election. Right now we know that the elections to the Lok Sabha and the elections to our respective state assemblies are held not simultaneously. So this is the proposal which the government of the day is proposing. And here we have to understand that this is not a very new concept here. The very first general election which were held in 1951, they were on the basis of simultaneous elections. For the very first time, when the election exercises were starting in the 1950s, and finally when the election was conducted in 1951, back then the election commission held it fit to conduct both the elections at the same time and the same venue. And that is why we have to understand that India is not alien to this concept, because further we have to understand further for the next 3 election cycles India follow the same thing. Except there were some elections in states like Kerala and Nagaland where the elections were not held simultaneously due to various internal reasons, but more or less according to the last election cycle of 1967, the elections were in India were quite simultaneous. Then we have to understand there were various political changes from the 1960s to 1970s, where the 4th Lok Sabha session, the 4th Lok Sabha term was dissolved prematurely in 1971, following which we also saw the National Emergency Declaration. And here we have to understand that due to various politics and various political affairs that took place during that time, after that and prominently from the 1990s and 2000 onwards, very few elections in say states were held in accordance with the national elections. As of now, we can understand after 1999, only 4 state assemblies are held in accordance with the or say in close proximity with the national elections. Otherwise, other states are totally held say after 1 or 2 or 3 within 3 to 5 years after the national election. Now this is a very concerning aspect in some issues that we are going to discuss in the very next topic. Now we have to understand that at least 2 rounds of assembly general elections are held every year. That means at least 2 times the states or say the various states in India, they go to elections, and this can be a very disruptive activity for some reasons. Now the idea for this can we understand that since India already had a past experience with this one nation one election, the idea has been time and again floated by various institutions and leaders. Institutions like the Election Commission of India, the Planning Commission, even the Law Commission's report of say 1999, the Niti Aayog, they all recommended conducting the, or say returning back the one nation one election at various intervals. So we have to understand, we have to discuss this issue in great detail, and also because this is a prominent current affairs topic nowadays, so let us discuss the issues with the current system or current electoral system as of now. See, if we transition to a one nation one election, we have to understand we already have the past experience. Now, according to past experience, there have not been major hurdles, but we will be discussing some of the issues also in the next one. Now here let us discuss the benefits or the demerits of the current system. Now see, right now we are having massive expenditure from both the political party sides and also from the Election Commission of India. Now see, according to Lok Sabha data, we find that according to Election Commission of India, expenditures from 2019 figures, we can find out around 4,000 crores were spent in the 2019 elections from the Election Commission of India's side. So this is a very, very huge expenditure we have to understand, because we have to understand that the ECI has to conduct the elections both at the state levels and at the center levels. And simultaneously we have to understand for those expenditures they have to spend differently at different periods of time. And that is why we have to understand that if we transition to a one nation one election aspect, we will be saving on transportation, accommodation, storage arrangements, training, remuneration and so on. So Election Commission will be saving on these things, and finally these aspects or say these savings can be invested in developmental activities. Election Commission of India can spend the money saved here to increase voter awareness campaigns so that more and more people can be enrolled, can be called in to vote. Then we have to understand the next issue is about human resources, because we understand that in state elections, in national elections, there are a lot of people involved in the election aspects, from say senior officials such as IAS, IRS, IPS officers, to say state level officers, to school teachers, college teachers. They are all involved in the election machinery during the election months. Say it can be spanning say minimum of 1 month to 2 months to sometimes even 3 months in different phases of some elections. So we have to understand that these people, or say these people who are involved in governmental and say overall public activities, they are diverted into some aspects of electoral agendas for at least say 2 or 3 times every year. And mind you that apart from state elections, there are also panchayat elections too. There are also municipal elections too. So these elections also require huge amount of manpower. And here we have to understand that these are all people involved in these kind of activities at the cost of doing their actual job. Now if we can streamline everything, so we have to understand we can only use these people for one time. So that is the biggest benefit. Then also we have to understand, given India's recent security imperatives, India must also look at the deployment of various security forces during elections, because we see we have a lot of security personnel outside the electoral booths. And according to Election Commission of India, there are around 800 companies of security forces which are deployed. Each company will be having around say 50 to 60 people. So we have to understand that the deployment of security forces during election is at the cost of deployment of security forces at the border areas or at the areas where India is having security concerns. Then we have to understand that the present mode of say elections is robbing the people of public services. So let us transition to a single electoral system where the ruling parties will be assisted by the public dignitaries for governance aspects instead of say constantly being involved in electoral mood over a period of time. Then we have to understand the model code of conduct which the Election Commission of India tries to involve in before elections. This disrupts the governmental activities, because for 1 month approx the government cannot undertake any new developmental projects, say the government of the power, and they cannot say announce any new welfare schemes because that will be violating the fair play of elections. But this is actually resulting in policy paralysis, because at the national election there will be MCC and the state elections there will be MCC. Then also at the very local elections, there will be again some kind of MCC by the state election commissions too in particular states. So that is why it leads to policy paralysis. Then we have to understand, due to this policy paralysis and due to the also effects and impacts discussed above, this also disrupts the delivery of essential services, because elections often lead to cordoning of certain places from say public services. So this lead to disruption of essential services like say ration, like say education, like say even internet in some places where violence takes place. Next, according to Law Commission, it has been stated that if we conduct the election at a simultaneous time, it will be also increasing voter turnout. So you can use such committee recommendations to in your answers. And finally, we have to understand in states like West Bengal, where political violence is reigning very much during the election times, this simultaneous election can reduce those kind of violence that take in part in some states. Now, according to these benefits, there are also some demerits or say varying opinions or counter opinions by some critics. They say that while the thought is good of one nation, one election, we have to enact a humongous amount of changes in our constitution, in our legislation, and in our also polity overall, because these changes will be requiring amendments to the constitution under article 83 and various other articles pertaining to the state legislatures. We have also to amend the article 356, which is the president's rule, and we have to understand why, because we need to understand that the terms of the particular session of the parliament, the convening aspect, the president's rules aspect are all directly and indirectly involved in this particular thing. Then we have also to introduce changes in the RPA Act of 1951, then rules of procedure of Lok Sabha, state assemblies. It will also affect the federal structure of the constitution, because it will be needing the ratification of more than or say 50% of the state assemblies. Then we have to understand that there can be potential issues when there or say some state governments can be dissolved in the mid-term due to various reasons, or say one of the popular reason is the loss of confidence of the house. Then the question is that what will be happening for the rest of the term of the house. So that is a big concern. Then other issue is at the central level. If the central say the parliament or say the Lok Sabha is dissolved due to some reason midway, then what will be the reason? Will all the state assemblies will be again dissolved, or some other aspect will be followed? So these are the various issues that remain, right? Then another issue is that the electoral cycle. That means that when a particular government loses its majority in the house, it is typically done by the vote of no confidence, right? Now we have to understand many governments or say many parliaments all over the world, to counter this issue and to bring in the reform of one nation, one election, they have said one thing, that we will be doing along with vote of no confidence another vote of confidence. That means if we can say that if we are voting against the present government, then we should be also giving an alternative government with a leader aside, and that is the vote of confidence, right? It is just the opposite of vote of no confidence. That means for one nation, one election, this vote of confidence must also be introduced in the constitution, because this will be immediately giving an alternative leader, an alternative government to the nation at large. Hence, it will be reducing the instability. So, according to this question, this can be addressed by vote of confidence. Then we have to understand India is a federal democracy, where the various interests of the state, the various issues of the state government, such as say land, electricity, which are primarily the issue at the state level, they are quite different at the national level. When national issues like say inflation, economic stability, then there are various other issues like say infrastructural development, which are big picture stuff. They are quite different at election period, because we have seen various states in India voting in favor of a particular party in the state elections. They are voting against that party in the national elections, because they think that that party would not be relevant at the national stage. So we have seen that the voter behavior in India is quite different at the center and the state levels. And that is why if we conduct the one nation, one election, can we not say that indirectly and directly these voters will be influenced towards a particular political party? So this is also one aspect that the policy or say committees, they must be considering. And finally, we have to understand the accountability of the government is also reduced, because we have to understand, say, the national elections is or say are held every 5 years. The state elections are also being done in the same manner, but there are many state governments which are say not held in simultaneous with the national elections. So the government of the day in various central levels and the state levels, they have to approach the people quite regularly during elections. So they are accountable say every 2 years, 3 years in particular states and also at the national level. So they are reaching out to people for a say lesser period of time. But if we go on to one nation and one election, we have to understand that both at the center and the state level, the politicians will be reaching out to the people every 5 years. So here maybe the accountability of the government will be reducing. So those are the benefits and these are the other side of the coin. We have to understand, since the policy or the committee that is accounted right now, they are deliberating on the issue and they are deliberating in a very fair and free manner. It is expected that a balanced opinion will be coming out with good solutions. Now we have to understand, apart from these electoral reforms, there are other electoral reforms which are pending too, such as preventing the amount of criminals in politics, such as making election funding more and more transparent, specifically now when the electoral bonds are in the purview of the Supreme Court. Then there are other issues of deregistering political parties which are involved in anti-national activities. So these are all the reforms which are pending on the other side. Those reforms must also be addressed with these, because those are as important as conducting the one nation, one election at the same time. Now, in the next article, the Supreme Court is taking a very, very stern approach regarding child adoption in India. It has called for collaborative efforts to bring children into the adoption pool. This is very important again from GS2, where we have to discuss various welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population. And children is one of those vulnerable sections of the population where the various aspects of children, such as child abuse, child adoption, they need to be discussed whenever we see these in current affairs. So that is why we should be discussing this. Now, at the very first, let me give you some very important data which will be used as fodder material for your mains. So please do note all this down, and also you can find the same in your handouts. Now, according to NCRB, more than 700 cases of children who are exposed and also who are abandoned are there, can be seen, right? We have to understand, according to the report, Delhi and Maharashtra are the top states which account for this abandonment of children, because we have to understand abandonment of children can be attributed to various reasons, such as the stigma regarding girl child. Then there are various other issues such as social status of the parents. These all leads to the circumstance of abandoning children. Then, according to Caring's portal, which is a portal related to child adoptions in India, there are around 30,000 parents who are awaiting adoptions. They have registered for in-country adoptions, but we have to understand, but only around 2,430 were legally declared eligible for adoption. So we have to around 28,000 parents who are prospective parents who have say registered for adoption, they are not getting any adoptions over the period of time. And often we have to see that they have to wait for around 2 to 3 to even 4 years for any adoption to happen. So the delay and adoption timeline is very, very stretched out. Then there is another very, very weird issue as of now. Now, we have a tendency to return things that we do not like. But there are some things which are legally and also ethically and morally very, very degradable. Such as, if you have adopted someone, can you ever return that child back? You should not, right? But we have to understand this is also a very, very heinous and immoral aspect of the society that we can see. And also you can quote these things as your ethical examples too in your GS4 paper. According to CARA, which is the Central Adoption Resource Authority, which is the nodal aspect of child adoption in India, they have found that there is an unusual upsurge in adoptive returns from the parent side. Now, you will be more surprised to know that around 60% of the children returned were girls, right? They were girls. Then there were children with special needs who are, say, disabled in some aspect of their life, so they are also being returned. And finally, there are also children who are also returned who are at the age of above 6, who are quite old right now. They should not be returned. They should be properly tended, they must be well fed, they must be educated, but they are being returned back. This is a very, very morally degradable side, and you please let me know in the comments that what are your opinions regarding these two. Now, according to CARA, around 70% of the registered, prospective parents, they opt for children in the age group of 0 to 2. That means these parents are having some preconceived notions while they are going to adoption. Generally, it should not be the case. If you are going to adopt a child, if you are going to adopt a life, should you having some preconceived notions? Because there have been many people, even I personally know many people, who have adopted children even at the age of 10 years and 12 years because they genuinely felt that the girl and the boy, they can do with a parent, they can do with a mother and father, and that should not be having any age. But in our country, in our society, we are seeing such preferences in skew or in favor of some children too. So this is a very unfortunate event. Now there are some other issues too. There are various issues of human trafficking. As we know, many children are kidnapped, abducted, even abandoned for the sake of human trafficking, for the sake of just sheer money that the parents want to even buy sometimes iPhones and say gadgets. So there have been some cases where due to these reasons these children have been trafficked, and they are trafficked finally into areas such as prostitution, extortion, drug cartels and whatnot. Then there are also issues at the end of the government too. At various government and also private child care institutions or child homes, there are examples of abuses. This abuse can be of sexual nature, can be of emotional and mental nature too. And this is very, very psychologically depraving for the children at these homes. Then also there are very poor conditions at these homes. That means the amount of water, sanitation, food. So these are not at par with the governmental regulation at these institutions. And also we have to understand that during COVID, many people lost their parents and also many children lost their mother and father. Due to this reason, they became COVID orphans, a very, very popular term which was mentioned in the Supreme Court debates which go on. And government must also look at this particular case, particularly via the PM Cares Fund. Now the government of the day has told that they can withdraw money or they can claim benefit from this particular fund of PM Cares. But overall, the institutional mechanism of COVID orphans still remain unclear now. And then we have to understand that there is also very low amount of data that is being captured by the government authorities regarding child who are being abandoned, trafficked and so on. Though we have this carings portal from the government side, but still the registration of adoption, the process and everything is not being proper on this portal. Now, after discussing the issues, we have to understand that government of the day do have some institutions or say initiatives for them. The very first is the Central Adoption Resource Authority, which is a statutory body of the Government of India, which is under the Ministry of Women Child Development, which was set up in 1990. The primary role we can easily understand. They are looking at the various cases of orphaned, abandoned and surrendered children, and they are regulating both in-house or say in-country and inter-country adoptions in India. And they will be doing this via some associated and recognized adoption agencies. These adoption agencies are generally located at the state and district levels, and they are run both by the government and the private organizations too. The inter-country adoptions that take place in India is generally under a very famous convention which can be very important for your prelims too. This is the 1993 Hague Convention. This is for the protection of children and their rights. After this authority, we have another important act which is known as the Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children Act of 2015. And this is requiring the hospitals, the child care institutions, which is now mandated under a law, then foster care agencies, then child welfare committees who will be finally signing for the adoption of children. So they are all legally brought under a single umbrella law. And here the procedure for adoption is to have a surrender letter from the parents or the guardians. And after the parents and guardians have given a surrender letter to the child welfare committees, they are given around 60 days to reconsider their surrender. If some parents think within these 30 days or 60 days that they do not want to give their child up for adoption, they can withdraw their consent letter anytime. Now, there are some special cases. For example, in some cases, some parents or say both of the parents are alcoholics or addicts, and this renders them incapable of raising any children. And that is why these are the special cases when, in case the parents are such, they are automatically eligible for adoption. Then it is the duty of the officer or the authority to actually produce the child at the child welfare committee within 24 hours after the submission, or say after the expiry of 60 days, and also the surrender letter to the government. Then we have to understand, since this inquiry process will be taking place say over 60 days, and also various proceedings will be taking place with the parents, that why they are giving up for adoption their child and so on, the institutional mechanism is that no FIR can be filed during the process of inquiry. This is to protect the privacy of the parents and their decision too. Then finally, the privacy of the children is also protected, because disclosure of identity to children is strictly prohibited, because we have to understand when the child will ultimately grow up, then these data, these inquiries can be used against them to protect them from this abuse. This particular mechanism is given to prevent the further psychological abuse and the mental and emotional trauma that they may face in the near future. So everything is made highly confidential in nature. Now, in the latest one, the Supreme Court observed that there are various lapses in this particular mechanism. In pursuant with the issues that we discussed in the very beginning, the Supreme Court went on to define who is an unfit guardian. Now we know that in special case under the Juvenile Justice Act, there are some parents who are addicts, right? But they were not a broad definition of an unfit guardian, because we have to understand that while a child grow up, right, they face various emotional trauma if either of their parents are not of stable nature, right? That is why Supreme Court went forward to define unfit guardians, who are unwilling or incapable for parenting, indulging in substance drug abuse or alcohol, known to have abused or neglected the child, having a criminal record, in need for care themselves, or say they are clinically or medically depressed, mentally unsound. So such children must not be in close proximity with their parents no matter what, because gradually the toxicity in their parents' life creeps into their children's life. And this is a very sad truth that parents, children not only in India but all over the world typically face. So you and I may be very lucky that we did not face, but many of our fellows, many of our dear friends have gone through this, and this remains a very lifelong scar on them. So that is why Supreme Court has took the effort to define this. Such children should be immediately identified district-wise in the country who are in the category of unfit parents. So Supreme Court is taking a very strong stand now. Then the states and the union territories need to begin a bi-monthly drive to identify children in the orphaned, abandoned, surrendered category. So it is now stepping up the game and stepping up the heat and the action on the district authorities too, that they have to go on a bi-monthly drive to register them. Then the states have to and the UTs have to compile data on potential children for adoption, especially those children too who are languishing in the child care institutions. There are many children who for years they spend their entire life waiting for adoption in the child care institutions in these dingy, dark conditions where they are typically neglected, abused, and whatnot. So they have also to be typically rehabilitated as soon as possible. And finally, the Carings portal, which is a portal, digital portal, online portal, which is to track and register and view all the applications of adoption in India, it must be totally updated and registration must be made up to date. The way forward here we have to understand after the Supreme Court observation, since it has taken a very big step, the government must also step in to increase awareness. Awareness in cases of increasing the need for letting people know that it is okay to give up children for adoption when the parents are unfit, or say when the parents are willing to do it so following legal ways. And also it should be making people aware of the illegal and also the penalties under this particular provision, so that human trafficking and various other things do not take place. Finally, the government also can ponder on a separate constitutional body, if not constitutional, legal or statutory body at the apex level to fight this menace, because we have to understand that children are the future of our nation, especially at a time when India is looking at a demographic dividend by 2041. In this time, the children right now are precious resources, so let us protect them. Now, in the next article, this is about the recent report, which is known as the Emissions Gap Report 2023. And this is released by the United Nations. And here, it is telling that as greenhouse gas emissions is hitting new highs, temperature records tumble and climate impacts intensify, the world is heading for a temperature rise far above the Paris climate goals. Now, according to the Paris Climate Agreement, which was agreed upon in 2015, the world agreed to limit its greenhouse gas emissions to pre-industrial revolution levels by around 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050 and 2 degrees Celsius by 2100. So these are the goals of Paris Climate Agreement, and now the report is telling that the world is miserably failing to do so. Now this is important from our GS3 aspect of conservation, environmental pollution and degradation. Okay, here let us go through some of the basics first, then we will be going to discuss some of the very important data that you can use in your mains answers. See, this particular emissions gap report, this emissions gap, the words are suggesting that there are some gaps. Gaps of what? What the world actually promised to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by, and what it is actually doing now. It means that this is an annual and independent science-based assessment of the overall world's greenhouse gas pledged emissions under the Paris Agreement and the various national agreements that they have under the reductions required to along with the climate change goals. That is along with the goals set out in the Paris Agreement, that is the 1.5 target and the 2-degree target. So that is the goal of the entire world right now, and this is the gap that is being shown. Now if we can see here, according to this figure, we can see that there are many countries which are listed here, such as Argentina, Australia, Brazil, even the G20. We have India here. The percentage that is being shown here, 11, 14, 9%, these are the percentages of the individual countries in which they have fallen short of their pledged reductions. Now, what are these falling short, or what are these pledged reductions? These are actually known as the nationally determined contribution. Nationally determined contributions are actually another part of the Paris Agreement, where the individual national countries, they said that okay, we will be now deciding our own climate agendas and objectives because we know the capabilities of our own countries, right? Because we have to understand the various countries, like the developing countries such as the global south countries, they cannot be forced into having any binding legal agreement on climate change such that they cannot produce more and more on, say, fossil fuels, they cannot consume this, they have to achieve net zero by 2030 and so on, which are actually very possible on the side of the global north nations, not the global south countries. So we have to understand that these nationally determined contributions are those greenhouse gas targets which were agreed for the very first time under UNFCCC, that apply equally to both developing and developed nations, which they will determine on their own. So that is why the term nation is also there. So generally, these are non-binding national climate action plans to reduce emissions, and generally they are under two headers. First, climate change mitigation. The mitigation, for example, is a reduction of fossil fuel, adoption of green technologies, these. And finally, the climate related targets for global greenhouse gas emission reductions, such as reducing the existing level of reduction. So these plans must be there. According to this, India also has its own NDCs. Recently, it is given the name of Panchamrit, which are the targets as we can see here, that is reaching around 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy capacity by 2030. This will be totally, or this is aimed at reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Then achieving around 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy by 2030. Then reduction of total projected carbon emissions by around 1 billion tons from now to 2030, and this will be done by planting more and more trees, forests and so on. Reduction of the carbon intensity of the economy, that is the reduction of or say the amount of carbon dioxide as a proportion of the GDP or gross domestic product of the Indian economy, that must be reduced by 45% by 2030 over 2005 levels. And finally, achieving the net zero target by 2070, where the net zero means that whatever we have emitted or whatever greenhouse gas we have emitted to the amount of greenhouse gas we have consumed, that should be zero, hence lower emissions. Now we can have a look at this graph again. We can see most of the nations, right, where their current policies are indicated by this color, right, most of the countries are falling short. And here at 2015 levels or at Paris Agreement level, also we can see major economies such as even India and G20 as a whole, right, they are falling short. So this is a very major cause of concern. According to the report, as we can see, that there are various records that are broken in this particular year, which is very important for your mains. Let me tell you, you can use this in your answers. Now let me just give you the brief idea of these reports. September of 2023 has been the hottest year, or say the hottest month ever. So this is a very concerning aspect, because more and more heat will be leading to warming of the planet and hence causing the melting of the glaciers and whatnot. So that is why you have to understand that September being the hottest month is a very cause of concern. Next, the global greenhouse gas rose by 1.2% from 21 to 22, reaching a record 57.4 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now what is carbon dioxide equivalent? We know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, right? It is having the potential of warming up the planet. Now, apart from CO2, there are many other gases also which are having the same or say more greenhouse gas potential or say more global warming potential. So those gases along with CO2, they are referenced under a single measure, that is this carbon dioxide equivalent. So another aspect of this is that the global average temperature at 1.8 degree is right now, which is above the pre-industrial level, where we were targeting to limit the rise of global temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. Right now we are already at 1.8. That means we have already bridged the target. And very unsurprising that all of the G20 nations, they are not at a pace to reduce the emissions. As we can see from the figure here, right, the fossil carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, then there are various gases which we can see here. They are increasing over a period of time, and this is highly very alarming. Next, we are also seeing a lot of devastating disasters, natural disasters, even some cases of say atmospheric disasters too. Say we have seen the case of say severe floods in Pakistan, Malaysia and Australia over 2022-2023. Then we also saw heat waves in our own country and also in Asia and Europe, which also caused wildfires in some aspects too. Then China also saw their worst drought in 60 years. Storm Kiaran in Western Europe, which was quite uncertain because the Western Europe do not get impacted by some big storms they are being seen. Then the cyclones which are hitting the Madagascar coast, which is also very uncommon, that typically occurred this year too. Then Europe, Australia, California, they are raging under wildfires. Then we have to understand, according to IPCC reports, there are some things known as tipping points. Tipping points are those interconnected relations that have all over the globe related to climates, related to geographies, related to environment all across the world. For example, let us take the case of Amazon rainforest. Now we have to understand, since there are a lot of deforestation taking place in the Amazon, and also we are understanding that the overall global temperature is also rising. It can potentially lead to the dieback or say eventually the death of the Amazon rainforest. If that take place, generally we know that Amazon rainforests are the lungs of our planet. It will be resulting in the depletion of CO2 sequestration from the atmosphere. Then it can also lead to the changes in the El Nino Southern Oscillation aspect, directly and indirectly. If we look at our Indian side, the disruption in Indian monsoon can lead to various catastrophic changes not only within India but also in the rest of the world too. Then there are many other issues too, such as the melting of the Arctic ice, Antarctic ice. They will be raising the global sea levels, and this can also lead to the weakening of the ocean currents, which is one of the larger theories regarding ocean currents is the Atlantic Meridional Current, which is also known as AMOC. If it weakens, it can lead to global changes in ocean currents all over the world's oceans, and this can lead to severe impacts all over the world. And that is why we have to understand these tipping points are those sensitive areas of global climate that need our concern as of now, as soon as possible. Next, we have to understand the country's current emission pledge is highly insufficient, and that is steadily putting the climate goals out of our reach. According to this report, we have to understand that the global low carbon transformations according to various countries that is targeted by 2030, they are around facing a shortage of around 28% for a 2-degree pathway, that is limiting the global rise by 2 degrees Celsius. They are falling short around. Then also, they are also falling short by around 42% when it comes to a 1.5 degree pathway. And additionally, the conditional NDCs, we have to understand there are two types of NDCs. First, the conditional and the non-conditional. If the global community as a whole implements the conditional along with non-conditional, then it can also reduce both of these estimates by around 3 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that is why we have to understand the world must be stepping up its effort in this manner. Now, the way ahead in this matter, we have to understand that the planet warming greenhouse gas emissions must fall by 42% by 2030 to actually keep the goal of this rise, limiting the rise by 1.5 degree, a practical one. Even in the most optimistic scenario, the chance is very low to around just 14%, because the world as a whole is not willing to cut down on their emissions, because the global north countries, they are in their own dreams. The global south countries, they are struggling to keep up with their commitments. So it is very difficult that the world will be converging to limiting the same, and that is why we have around only 1/10 of a probability of limiting this. Then is the goal dead as of now? Some progress is obviously there. For example, say according to around 2030 levels, based on the policies that the countries, or say the based on the NDCs that the countries have put in, right? At 2015 levels, right? The projection was that 16% of the global greenhouse gases are projected to increase by 2023. But actually it increased by around only 3% from 2015 levels. So we have to understand from the projection that we have way back, right now we are actually increasing a little only. Well, this is good news, but also there are other concerns also, as we have seen in the report ago. Here we have to keep in the mind the various quotes by various important personalities. And here Antonio Guterres, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations, he said that we know it is still possible to make the 1.5 degree goal a very possible one. It requires steering out the poison root of the climate crisis, that is the fossil fuels, and it demands a just, equitable, renewable transition. Now, according to this, we have to understand the coal, oil and gas that is extracted over its timeline over all of the developing and developed countries. We have to understand this will be overshooting the climate budget, or say the carbon budget we have by 2050 by around 3.5 times. That means if we go on to consume the coal and these fossil fuels, we will be overshooting the carbon budget by 3.5 times and full for 2 degree target. So we have to immediately stop. You have to immediately stop this poison root. Then the climate finance aspect must be sorted out, because the developed countries must be held accountable for their historical responsibilities. Then the global stocktake, which is actually also slated for COP28 at Dubai, it must be deliberating on the revised NDCs that the countries should be pledging by 2035. It is to be seen that the global stocktake must be putting up more restrictions on the countries which are polluting more, and also equitably. Then the world must be focusing on carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, that is known as carbon sequestration 2. And finally, the annual UN summit, which is taking place at the COP28 at Dubai, the leaders are expected to make out some possible and green commitments in the near future. Now, in the next article, it is about National Immunization Program, and here the news is about the WHO, which is aimed at integrating COVID-19 pandemic vaccines with the national immigration programs in almost all of the countries. The WHO and their officials are deliberating on transition from the emergency use authorization to market authorization for COVID vaccines. Now, this is important for our social development aspect of economics in prelims exam. Now, let us understand this in more detail using the terms of emergency use utilization and market authorization. Say, for example, when the COVID pandemic was in when it was in full force, the entire global economy and global countries were in shutdown. Now, we needed an immediate remedy to that via vaccines, and that is why various pharmaceutical companies all over the world, they started working on the vaccines, and they soon, over a period of say 5 to 6 months, they came up with protocols and of various models of vaccines, and finally they were released in the markets too. But the WHO, they have to understand that since the WHO declared the COVID-19 pandemic as a public health emergency, it can in principle via its various guidelines say that under emergency use authorization, because this is a case of emergency, that is a case of public health emergency, and also a pandemic and epidemic are public health emergencies, the WHO can say that the COVID vaccines which are manufactured by various pharmaceutical companies, they can be used for emergency use for across all over the world by some specific communities. Because we have to understand the benefits out of this procedure is to help the people in need who need these vaccines in these public health emergencies. Then it is also saving lives and also accelerated development of new medical products too. For example, if a pharmaceutical company is developing a COVID vaccine, it can promote the same, or say share the knowledge of producing the vaccines with rest of the companies too. So under emergency authorization, the WHO can do this. Some examples are the COVID vaccine, Ebola vaccine and Zika virus vaccines. The WHO actually did this emergency use authorization so that people all over the world can take benefit of this, and it is a very, very good thing to do. But we have to understand, while this is a very emergency provision and the WHO is in an urgency to immediately declare the vaccines for emergency use, but it has not been, say, tested properly, or proper research has not been done in a proper manner. That is why the next phase of this EUA is market authorization. Now here the WHO has told that these vaccines are totally safe as of now, and right now the WHO parameters and every guidelines have been properly adhered to, and that is why these vaccines can now be used in national immunization programs of different governments. So these are the primary differences between EUA and market authorization, where vaccines on the market authorizations are more safe and more effective. Now, looking at our own immunization program, it started for the very first time in 1985. Following, it was adopted in the National Reproductive and Child Health Program in 1997. Now, this program is actually aimed at vaccine preventable diseases both at the national and other level, with a sub-national level. The diseases you can see here. Further, the government of the day also launched the Mission Indradhanush in 2014, which is aimed at covering the uncovered regions by immunization programs, such as very remote rural areas where all children and all expectant women will be administered the vaccines. Finally, we also have an important term known as the Electronic Vaccine Intelligence Network, which is also known as EVIN, which is digitizing the entire vaccine ecosystem in the country of the India up to the district level from the central level. Also, we have accordingly National Cold Chain Management Information System, which is tracking the temperatures, the movement, storage, location of all the vaccines in the country. Finally, we'll be concluding the session with tantalum, because this is a rare earth, or say rare metal, which has been found by the IIT Ropar in the Sutlej river sand of Punjab. This is very important for general science, because time and again UPSC can ask about some metals which are recently discovered. Now see, this is the tantalum. Here we have to understand it was discovered for the very first time in 1802 by Anders Gustav Ekenberg, a Swedish scientist in Sweden only. Initially it was thought to be a form of niobium, which is almost similar to tantalum. Here it is having atomic number of 73, and here we have to understand, we have to only be concerned with the properties here, because these are the things that can be asked here, and also the applications of it. See, generally it is grey in color, as we can see, and it is quite heavy. It is having a high corrosion resistance, because as soon as the metal is exposed to air, it forms oxides, and this oxide formation on the surface of the metal makes it very corrosion resistance, and that is why it is having various application in the application field also. Then when it is pure, tantalum is very ductile, it can be easily bent and be also malleable. It is having an extremely high melting point, only being succeeded by tungsten and rhenium. The applications we can see, it can be used as capacitors, because it is capable of storing more electricity in smaller size due to his very extremely high melting point. And it can also be used as substitute for platinum for applications in chemical plants, nuclear and aeroplanes too. So this was all for today. I thank you very much for being a very patient audience. All the best for your examination. Till the next time we meet again. Thank you.